Hello, it's me, Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen. Today we're sharing a special episode from the show Jewish Insights with Rabbi Justin Pines on JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service. Rabbi Justin and I sat down in the JBS studio for a deep dive conversation in honor of Jewish Book Month about Jewish storytelling and, of course, his 5-book selections. Rabbi Justin Pines worked on a translation of and commentary on writings by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter called Or Yisrael with Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who will be our guest next week on our regular episode of the 5 Books podcast. We'll be back then with our usual show. Stay tuned, and we hope you enjoy.
Jewish Insights with Justin Pines on JBS is made possible in part by the clubs at Pearl River, New York. Luxury rental communities for ages 55 and better, now leasing Phase 3 at the Reserve. And the B.L. Manger Foundation.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב
Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. This month marks the 100th anniversary of Jewish Book Month, a century since Fanny Goldstein first set up a small display of Jewish books in the Boston Public Library, celebrating Jewish identity through literature. 100 years later, we're still doing exactly that, sharing our shelves and our stories. Here at JBS, we've been celebrating Jewish Book Month in partnership with the Jewish Book Council all month long, highlighting authors, conversations, and the stories that continue to shape Jewish life today, including shows like Totally Booked on JBS with Zibby Owens, which is Thursday nights at 7:30, and many others that bring Jewish voices and ideas to audiences everywhere. I'm thrilled to continue that celebration with this week's guest, Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen, host of the 5 Books podcast. Tali has moved seamlessly between the worlds of publishing and Jewish life, as a literary agent, a writer, a reviewer of books, an educator of writing, and as a leader in numerous Jewish institutions, including the Natan Fund, where she chairs the Notable Books Award Committee. Her podcast, The 5 Books, features Jewish authors reflecting on the books that shaped them, from Dara Horn on Shalom Aleichem to Jennifer Weiner on Philip Roth, and it's quickly become one of the most exciting new spaces for Jewish ideas and stories. During the next hour, in honor of Jewish Book Month, we're turning the tables a bit. Tali will share her insights on the Jewish books shaping readers in 2025, and then she'll interview me about the 5 books that have most shaped my Jewish journey. Welcome, Tali.
Thank you so much for having me.
So excited to be here with you.
I'm a fan of your show as well.
All right, I'm a fan of your show, and I know we have lots of family and connections and all those things. Shout out to Auntie Reet,
Yes.
who I'm sure will be excited to watch this when she watches this. So let's start with, you have this whole career in stories and writing and those kind of things. How did you develop your interest in stories and writing, and kind of take me from the journey that ends up taking you to the podcast that you're doing today?
Sure. I have always been a reader, and I think when you grow up Shabbat observant and there's very little to do, that also helps develop one as a reader. Going to the library every Friday and coming home with a stack of books. I grew up in a house where reading was, just what everybody did. My father is a writer. My uncle is an English professor. It just sort of came naturally. And so then when I graduated college and was deciding what to do, I was really very tangibly choosing between, should I go into the Jewish communal world, which was also very much part of my family's life, or should I go into book publishing? So I took a quick detour and did a 2-year stint running a Jewish organization that was for college students called Lights in Action back in the day. And then I went into book publishing. I became a literary agent. I stayed there for a while. And then when I left, I was raising my kids and also involved in all kinds of other literary things. Which took me to the Natan Fund and chairing the Natan Notable Books Committee, which is administered by the Jewish Book Council. So I really got to see all that they were doing close up and how they were lifting up Jewish voices and Jewish books and Jewish authors, and was just really amazed by all they were doing. So after October 7th, when I think for many of us, it felt like the world kind of shifted off its axis a little bit. And, I think in thinking about questions like, how do we live with more empathy? How can we better understand each other? How can we make meaning from our values? I turn to books. That's where I go. And to then see that there was this feeling of exclusion for Jewish authors and Jewish books that was happening felt like that just feels like the last place to be excluding people from a conversation. It feels like books are really just how we get inside someone else's head, how we experience things we've never experienced ourselves. So I really felt like, what can I be doing to shift the conversation, to be doing more to lift up these books? And so that became a conversation with the Jewish Book Council of like, what are people doing? And then I had this idea of like, what if we did this podcast? And I didn't necessarily think that I would be the host from the beginning, but I did have a vision, and I really wanted to highlight not just the books that were coming out right now, but also the way that we are shaped by books and the way that we're influenced, and that our Jewish identities are so influenced and shaped by books that we've read and books that loom large in our Jewish cultural space.
Beautiful. All right, I have so many questions. We'll go back through that from the beginning. I'm not asking you your 5 questions. You'll ask me your 5 questions. But I certainly am interested in how books have shaped your identity. Tell me a little bit. I was with Rabbi Shlomo Einhorn, who's out in L.A., and I saw him over the high holidays, and he has like this thesis that the couple books that like really stuck with you as a kid are the ones that really shape the rest of your life, that books really like send you on a journey in some ways. You mentioned kind of your stack of books coming home. When you think back to really like early when you were young, were you like an Amelia Bedelia or like boxcar children? Like where did you start?
I mean, I really read everything. I think in terms of the Jewish books that really meant something to me, there was a picture book called Sarah Somebody. I think her name is Frances Slobodkin.
Wow. Cool name. I'm a Musser guy. We love the altar of Slobodka.
Okay.
Anyway, keep going, yeah.
It was about a girl in a shtetl, and nobody had any money for education, and somehow a woman comes back to the town and she teaches the girls how to read. And that page where Sarah learns how to read, she's like the first in the class, and they're all like huddled in this very cold room. And she feels so proud of herself. I mean, that was just like a magical book and magical story. And I think also, I'd always ask my grandfather for stories of growing up in the shtetl. He came to America when he was like 15. And, I think that there are ways that books kind of merge with the stories about your life in a way that you feel like you can access parts of your history that you can't otherwise. So I think that's like a book that did that for me.
Beautiful. And are you drawn to like certain genres over others? Is there like, do you have the flavors you love most?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
Oh, is that true?
No.
Because you host a show about books?
I
love them all.
I love them all. I do.
Sorry.
I do try to highlight like a wide range of genres, even if they're not my personal favorite.
Yeah.
But I'm always drawn to historical fiction and just, being able to put yourself back in a time and space that you wouldn't otherwise know in that intimate way, I think is magical.
Right, beautiful. Yeah, I'm into historical fiction also. I don't read enough of it. I actually don't remember the author's full name. I think it's Yochai Beckler or something like that. Has 2 books. She's an Israeli author on, one is Rabbi Akiva's wife's story from her perspective, and the other is which I love, is the King David story from the perspective as if it was written by King Saul's scribes instead of King David. And like those to me, it's like flips our history on its head, which I think is like so I love that stuff.
Yeah,
really
good. Reading The Red Tent, I remember vividly reading The Red Tent for the first time, or even As a Driven Leaf. And when you're Milton Steinberg, when you're studying Jewish text, I think especially, then to be able to see it in this different way is such a powerful thing.
Right. We were talking about Alana Krishnan before. I feel like the way she describes like the book of Breshit and her chapter on Breshit is like, this is almost better than the original. And I think about this a lot now with AI, because we think about Torah certainly as like this like text that like every word, every dot matters exactly a certain way. But now AI has the ability to tell stories about the stories in the Bible that is just like so beautifully written and flowy, and you just like can jump right in. And it's like, it's a whole, how we retell the stories is very interesting as well.
It's a different take on AI.
Yeah. Do you have a take on AI you want to jump on? It's ruining writing as we know it.
I don't know. Remains to be seen.
Yeah. I think, that'll be a different conversation, I guess, we'll say. All right, fine. So we got historical fiction as a bit of a genre. That makes sense. And I want to ask you a question, but are there certain books that you feel like are like the one that like changed your life forever? Or are there any, like, does that to be the one? Because I know the 5 questions is the one, but is there, when I ask you, is there one you think of that really set you in a direction?
I mean, the Olive Kind family stories, which have come up a bunch of times on our podcast.
Yeah.
For very good reason. They were so formative for me also. 5 little girls growing up on the Lower East Side in the turn of the century. Alana Krishan also has like a whole section about it in her book, which is amazing. More recently, I think there are books that have been so powerful. Witness by Ariel Berger, which is about Elie Wiesel and being in his classroom. It's fascinating.
Wow.
There's a book, My Father's Paradise, by Ariel Sabar, about his father's life in, near Kurdistan, I believe.
Okay.
And then there's a book, 100 Saturdays, by Michael Frank, which is the story of a woman named Stella Levy from the island of Rhodes, and what her life was like in Rhodes pre-Holocaust. And then it does get into her survival story. But I think any book that kind of just, again, connects you to the past and connects me to Jewish history in ways that really just expand and broaden my perspective, I find really, really powerful.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Beautiful. And then you mentioned the podcast a couple times. Just give me some highlights. What are, you've had, how many episodes in are you now, ish?
About 50.
All right. Wow. Okay. That's a lot. And, my life, I think I often think in aha moments. I just when I think back on things, I only remember moments where I learned something. I never remember what color the carpet was is what I've learned, but I remember that or the smell. Are there certain moments that stick out for you where you either had a major learning from one of your guests or just something clicked for you that that you think of as a highlight now that you're at the half century mark on your 100 years of books, 50
it's been
50
a year.
episodes.
It's been a year. Every episode I do kind of feels like my new favorite episode.
Yeah, of course. You love all genres and you love all
No, but it's true. I'll talk to our producer and I'll be like, that was amazing. I think that's my new favorite.
Yeah.
But I recognize that I do that pretty much every time.
Yeah.
I got to interview Francine Claxburn, who's written numerous books, and she was kind of a leader in the feminist movement and the Jewish feminist movement. She's someone that I knew a bit through my parents, and just was a huge role model to me. So then to sit down with her, she wrote a book about Henrietta Zold, which is an incredible book. And she was talking about her life going to Jewish day school in the 1930s and 40s. And the quality of that Jewish education, because those women really didn't have very many options for career. So these brilliant women were elementary school teachers. And hearing her talk about her education and then her journey as a feminist leader was really just definitely a highlight. That was one for sure. I talked to Gail Foreman, who is an incredible YA author. And I had that conversation with her because I read a book called Not Nothing with my youngest daughter, who's 10. And that book is set partially in the present and partly it's also a Holocaust narrative. And just watching my daughter be blown away by this book, it was her first kind of exposure to a Holocaust story. And it was so deeply meaningful to her, and she just couldn't wait to read more of it. And so then I was like, I'm going to reach out to Gail. I don't usually cover, YA authors, but I really wanted to have that conversation, and we had an incredible conversation. That was also a highlight. And then, my most recent one was with Sam Sussman, who wrote a beautiful, stunning book about his mother called Boy from the North Country. Right. And he talks about Amos Oz. That was one of his book picks, and as I was reading it, he names his fictional mother with the last name Klausner, and I was like, I wonder if that's a coincidence. That's Amos Oz's. That was his last name before he Hebraicized it to Oz, and so hearing him talk about his connection to Amos Oz and how he sees his book as sort of the thread continuing was really just magical. So those are some highlights. Wow.
All right. Those sound great. You mentioned reading with your daughter. Say a little bit around you mentioned you grew up in a home where reading was such a core piece of that. Is that something you've tried to be intentional about with raising your own children? And like, how do you do that if that is the case?
So I have 4 kids. Yeah. And as all of parents know, after you have a second child, you really just can't predict who they are and what they love. It was very, I had this vision of like just sitting around reading on a Friday night after Shabbat dinner with all my kids. That really hasn't happened. My kids do, some of them are more readers than others. They do appreciate books. And reading to them has been such a gift. And especially getting to like revisit books 4 times that I really love. And reading All of a Kind Family 4 times is what's better than that?
Amazing. Yeah, I think I it's always hard to gear up at the end of the night. I have, young children and like trying to be present in that way, but I find that like that opportunity to read, especially if you're both enjoying the book and it's fun, I'm always like, you read a chapter without me last night? I missed it, right? Or they'll wake up in the morning and finish the book and I'm like, wait, I don't know now.
I know.
But sometimes it's nice to have that. It's a great bonding experience. We mentioned Alana before. She's talked about that as well, the opportunity to sit with your child and kind of explore something together in that way. I haven't had that many repeats in terms of reading books multiple times. Like I have board books like that that we've done a bunch of times. That's cool. Very nice. Fine. All right, talk to me a little bit around, what's happening in Jewish books today, 2025. I know there's like anything else, there's trends of what's coming and people are building up on what's been in the past. Just share a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't know that I can speak to like publishing trends in terms of like what publishers are looking for. I think from my vantage point, and these may not be like very exciting insights, but what I notice is I think, well, I will say, like, when I started out in book publishing as a literary agent, most of the Jewish books that came through were Holocaust stories. They were maybe some stories of survivors, but already, like, a lot of children writing about their parents' experiences. And I think as a young person, mistakenly, I was like, oh, why are we still, talking about this? Not in a way to diminish the magnitude of what happened, but, like, let's talk about Jewish joy. Let's talk about, all these interesting things happening in Judaism and Jewish life. But I think I understand now that 80 years is like really not a long time to make sense of such a cataclysmic event. And the Holocaust books being written now are being written by like 3rd generation, and they're exploring stories in a different way. And I think we just are not even scratching the surface of the magnitude of the rupture. There's the loss and the horror, which I think were a lot of like the memoirs being published initially in the first like post-year wars, which really didn't start until like the 60s probably with Elie Wiesel. But now there are stories like Sarah Wildman has a book called Paper Love, which explores what happened to a woman that her grandfather left behind when he was fleeing Germany in 1939. Or Menachem Kaiser has a book called Plunder, and he's looking at what happened to a property that belonged to his grandfather. There are these like different ways of talking about what was lost, what was here before, how much we just don't know about what was lost, that I think really resonates in a different way for a different generation.
Beautiful. Yeah, I've sat with Menachem. I've interviewed him about his book at a I think a Yad Vashem event. It was great. I thought it was such a for me, it was someone who's like deep in Holocaust stuff. That's a big part of my identity. Like having someone write a memoir about trying to regain lost family. It was just it felt like a whole new genre within Holocaust literature, which was very like powerful for me to experience. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Right. It's like evolving. I will say one of the books that I did not include. I was trying to find a way into my 5 because it's part of my identity was Schindler's List, which is like that book certainly shaped the book, the movie, My Grandfather was saved by Oskar Schindler, and that was a big piece of my understanding that story, and very similar to what you said earlier, which is like even going back and reading, right? I have like my grandfather, what he wrote, I have his testimonies, then also seeing what Thomas Keneally wrote in the book as well. Like you're just like piecing things together sometimes because I wasn't old enough to ask all the questions, if that makes sense. And I felt that one also like really brought home, obviously, the power of Schindler, but also the details of the story. Not the gory details, but more just like the way humans were involved, the choice, like how, the movie, which was the biggest blessing. My grandfather was so grateful that it happened. He hung with Spielberg, all those things. But it was, it very much like caught a moment and like the highlights, if that makes sense, and like trying to understand who Schindler was before and after, and that there was kind of this like period of his life where he showed up in a certain way, like that was beyond everything else, and then went back to not that. It was very, very interesting and powerful for me.
I'm sure it's powerful for your family to have, all of that information available to them. Right. Just like there's so many people who just have no idea. Right. I think it's an interesting thing that I think about. It goes back to this idea of storytelling, which is, for my grandfather, this is a story that needed to be told, and he was so happy when Thomas Keneally reached out to him, and they did the interview, and he got into the book and those kind of things, and then to have in his mind the greatest Jewish director tell it on the silver screen, and us all go to the premiere of it and go to the taping, and then the story got told. I feel like that generation in some ways it was the goal is to make sure the world knows about what happened on the Holocaust, and so what better way to do that than a book, a movie, those kind of things. That's why we have so many movies and books coming out as well. And I think the two things I think about, in the Holocaust genre itself is one is, one of the flaws of that approach, I think, was we spent a lot of time focusing on either what was lost or, the gory stuff, let's say, and not on a what's the value of the Jewish people? What's so important about them that we need to be worrying about preserving them? Even Holocaust trips, I found some of them were very much let's focus on the destruction, not what Jewish life was like before. And I feel these new strands that are okay, well, how does it affect the third generation, or how do we think about it? I think is very important. Yeah, I think that's so much of what Dara Horn tries to speak to, right? In that, if you focus just on kind of the moral story of be a good upstander and root for the underdog, then you're missing the Jewish story and the Jewish story of anti-Semitism, and that this is a particular story of anti-Semitism. Right, and then I think the other piece that you raised for me is this kind of I don't want to use the word golden generation because that is its own thing, and also who wants to say golden generation about the Holocaust, but it did feel in terms of plunder, to use the word plunder, plundering from that time, that it was it felt like not a once in a millennium, but something different in terms of yes, of course, every guest is amazing and every book is amazing. And in theory, getting an 8-hour testimony of every human in our life would be wonderful because they all have rich stories, and I believe everyone is created in God's image. But there seems to be something about that generation that they both witnessed, experienced, and came out of, and not everyone came out the same way. Something that was so unique in time that it feels we need to develop as much content around this as possible because there's just so much to take from this, if that makes sense. It does, and I think that's what I find so interesting now is that it's really third generation. I think in a weird way about, when we learn about the Israelites leaving Egypt and then it was 40 years in the desert because it had to be the third generation who then entered Israel. I do think about this third generation, which is, us and what comes after us. You need a new generation with fresh eyes to understand and make sense of things in a different way. And I think that's what we're seeing. And then, to your point, I think one of the other things that I've just noticed going on, and again, this is not revelatory, but just the explosion of Sephardi and Mizrachi stories, Middle Eastern, North African Jews. I think those stories seem new in publishing in the last several years. And again, it's this third generation of people whose grandparents left all these various countries. And for so long, the Jewish story in English literature was about European Jews. And so then expanding that and telling these stories about what, expanding our sense of or what Jews look like, what Jews sound like, what the Jewish experience is like, and recognizing that it's so much bigger than the slice that we're maybe more familiar with through Jewish literature.
Beautiful. It's fascinating. Are there, off the top of your heads, any books you recommend in that genre that have spoken to you?
So many.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Graver wrote a beautiful book called Cantica, which I think won a National Jewish Book Award. It traces her grandmother's story from Istanbul to Barcelona to Cuba to New York. I interviewed Esther Levi Shehibar, who has written a book called Sisters of Fortune, which is a fun, like Jane Austen take on the Syrian Jewish community in Brooklyn, like contemporary story,
Cool.
marriage story. Jordan Salama wrote a book called Strangers in the Desert. It's like a travelogue of him trying to trace his grandparents who had left, I believe they left Syria, and then they're in South America. There's so many of them that are exploding, and I think it's just, it's like a corrective to what we understand to be the Jewish story. It's like a necessary rebalancing of our bookshelf, so to speak.
Right. It goes back to the same question of like, to what extent do the books that are coming out reflect the Jewish people and the time that we're in? You know, being totally honest, I think about this more in terms of representation in media, right? Like movies and films and what's on Netflix and TV, that kind of stuff, but certainly in books as well. That's really interesting. Okay, fine. What else? What else is happening in Jewish books?
The other thing is really Jewish romance.
Okay.
I'm learning so much, and I think it's really just about Jewish joy. You know, I think romance as a genre, I think, has exploded in general, and there's a real attention to telling particular stories within romance, of like highlighting different communities' experience, whether it's, you know, queer romance or South Asian romance. And I think Jewish romance is kind of part of that trend. But there are authors like Jean Meltzer, Amanda Elliott, Felicia Grossman, Dahlia Adler, Heidi Shertak, who are, you know, some of those are writing from like an Orthodox perspective, and yet they're telling these like steamy stories. And I just think it's fantastic to like see that kind of Jewish representation in this very mainstream medium.
I love it. Amazing. All right. For listeners or viewers, there's a lot of homework there. I guess a lot of books to read up on. We'll start the list.
Yeah.
All right. Great. All right. We're halfway through. I'm going to turn the cards.
I'm so excited to talk to you. Okay. So, you know, what I generally start with is just to kind of like what your Jewish background was like. What was your Jewish childhood like?
Sure.
And then leading into what was a book that you read in your childhood that you feel like really impacted your Jewish identity?
Beautiful. All right. So I'll say, first, before I say anything about any books, I keep thinking of the line, there's a book I love called The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I love it. And in there, I think the main character says, my favorite book is the last book I read. And I think when I read that, I was like, oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
So I think even just preparing for this and trying to select 5 books, which I think I ended up choosing 6, I really couldn't do it, is so hard because there's just lots of good books out there. So I'll just say that first. In terms of my upbringing, I think I don't know if my parents created it on purpose, but I think I accidentally kind of ended up in an interesting upbringing. So the first is the Holocaust. I think that was a huge part of my upbringing, and Schindler as well. So the sense of, my grandfather lost all 4 of my grandparents survived the Holocaust. My grandfather, Murray Pantier, who kind of was the most vocal about Holocaust memory, lost all his siblings and his parents. He came to Hillside, New Jersey, where everyone on his block that he was friends with was basically survivors. I grew up assuming that any Jew in America was the grandchild of survivors because I didn't know beyond that. That's a lot of our family friends. And so I think that was a big piece, was just our family was taken away from us. How do we rebuild family, the closeness with family, and the sense of okay, we have an obligation to do Jewish, make the Jewish mission come back to life and serve the Jewish people. And if you're in a position to help, you have to help, because that's what Schindler did, and that's what my grandfather did in certain ways, and how to do that with my life. I think it was kind of one piece of my Jewish upbringing. And then I would say the others was that my parents sent me to Suburban Torah, which was an Orthodox shul in Livingston, and Solomon Schechter, which was a conservative day school in West Orange, New Jersey. And then I also went to Camp Starlight, which was they're not affiliated with the Reform movement, but I guess I would say most of the people who went there would go to Reform synagogues, if that makes sense. And we sang songs from Fiddler on the Roof at Friday night dinner, if that makes sense. May the Lord protect and defend you. That was Shalom Aleichem there, if that makes sense. So I think that it exposed me early to very different ways of being Jewish, if that makes sense. And then the last piece I'll add is that at my bar mitzvah, Molly Andron's father, whose name I can't think of right now, came to speak to our middle school class at Solomon Schechter and kind of gave this speech around you're responsible for your own actions right now. Take responsibility. And at the time, I was not keeping Shabbat, and I decided, for my bar mitzvah, I'm going to start keeping Shabbat. And that, began, kind of a journey of trying to grow in taking on more and more Jewish practices, and also discovering a way along the way that I wanted to do more and more. And I think, all of that together kind of, I think, turns me into someone who's, deeply pluralistic in terms of being able to find the best Judaism in everyone, and also really committed to serving the Jewish people, if that makes sense.
Beautiful.
So that's my in a nutshell. And then the book I thought of, I almost did Schindler's List, which we spoke about, but the book I thought of that really, I guess, shaped my childhood in that way is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I know that's not a Jewish book.
Yeah.
First of all, I was that kid who read all the books in school. Like, if we were assigned a book, I read it. I think that one I somehow read before. I think an older cousin gave it to me, and I read it. I think until I read that book, I assumed that everyone in the world was authentic and said what they felt, and like that's who they were. And then like Holden Caulfield like starts to introduce me to the phrase phony, and the idea of like someone could be representing something that they're not. And I guess either I was just totally living in the clouds, or I was idealistic or naive or whatever you want to call it. But that like exploded my brain in some ways, and then like I kind of became obsessed with authenticity, which I think I am to this day. Like I feel like in my relationships I was very focused on like, I want to be friends with people that are real with me, and I want to interact with people that are real. And if I'm interacting with someone who's quote unquote phony, that like I'm going to put up a wall a little bit because I don't want to be in that game. I actually think, I was drawn towards the nonprofit world ultimately. I think retroactively I realized that like, not to throw all of business under the table, but there's a lot of flexing in business meetings sometimes, where it feels like people need to represent something in order to extract something from someone, and I just like, it makes me like uncomfortable, if that makes sense. And so I think certainly deeply in relationships, kind of an obsession with surrounding myself with friends who I feel like are authentic, and I'm so grateful to God and the world that I have found those people, and I really feel like, both within my family and the group of friends that I've made, that like I have authentic people that I'm never like, I'm just myself in front of them, and I feel like they're themselves, and no one has to like put anything up or down. So that's huge for me. And then I think parallel to that, I think I became kind of obsessed with like searching for truth more broadly, not just in my relationships. So like just, I think I looked for like what is true in the world, if that makes sense. And I think a big part of that kind of coincided with this like taking on Jewish law was recognizing that most of the genres that were out there, whatever you want to call it, politics, economics, psychology, like a lot of them, it felt like people were trying to sell me something, and it wasn't necessarily in my best interest. And in Judaism, I felt that I found a pursuit of truth, a pursuit of authenticity, like a sense of debate that was about getting the answer, not about being right. I know now that I've been exposed to more academia and stuff, that like there are certainly blind sides in the Gemara, and in any person who's writing a text anywhere, there's going to be subjective things that affect the way they think. You could role of women, voice of women. You could think of examples like that. But it's certainly, I was drawn to Judaism as like this like multiple millennium, I don't know the plural, long search for truth that continues. And so I think really because of Catcher in the Rye, which was insane, my relationships became obsessed with searching for truth, and my life became obsessed with searching for truth, if that makes sense.
I love that, especially just, I think Catcher in the Rye speaks to that age so well.
Yeah.
For those reasons, but you really like took them in and internalized them in a really strong way.
Well, my favorite book is the last one I read. That's what happens, and that one really like.
But it did, and I mean, to me, that just is exactly what the power of books really does. Did you read it for school?
I think a cousin gave it to me before. I think I remember reading it in 6th, and I think we were assigned it in 8th. And I remember reading it in 6th and being like,
in 6th grade, you were already, wow, I'm impressed.
That was for fun. Like, I don't know how I had time to read a book for fun in Salman Schechter, where there was a lot of reading. But yeah, it really stuck with me. And I would even say that like, it flows through everything. Like actually, like, I've come to learn now, I'm older now, there's kind of like the 3 core tenets of Judaism, or like, we'll call them chesed, yira, and emet. Chesed being like kindness. I know you know this thing when I'm translating. Chesed being kindness, yira being about like self-restraint and discipline, and emet being like the search for truth. And I almost like, I self-diagnose myself as an emet person within those 3, though. Like I'm very focused on those questions of balance and searching for truth. Like the word emet it's got the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, aleph, and the last letter taf, and the mem in the middle, and it's like that idea of like how do you bring them all together? And I think like even like on this show, I really try to do that, if that makes sense. I think the most common thing I get from people is I'm different from most show hosts because I'm not like pushing an agenda on the person, that I'm like trying to like get a gotcha moment, that I'm like just really trying to excavate what's special about them and what ideas they have to bring to the world. And that to me is like the work in some ways. It's like, there is no like necessarily like one truth, but like if I can get some truth here and some truth there, that like a little bit of aleph, a little bit of taf, it all comes together. And it's like, I don't know, not that this sounds like I'm patting my back, but I think the sages reflect those, that like chesed is like, it says that if I'm not used to speaking this much on the show, I hope I'm not overdoing it, but that, you know, if the three things that we're trying to pursue are truth, kindness, and let's call it self-discipline, the three things that remove someone from the world are, you know, jealousy, lust, and honor-seeking, right? So jealousy is the opposite of kindness, right? We're trying to, Abraham, like we're trying to do good instead of trying to want what other people have. And Yira, Isaac, is about like self-discipline and holding yourself back, which is the opposite of lust and just like doing whatever's on your mind. And then the last one is this idea of like that honor and the pursuit of honor and the pursuit of truth are exact opposites, right? That if you're trying to like build up your sense of honor or power, you're not going to actually look for truth. You're going to put out the truth in the world that you feel like will help you be more successful, if that makes sense. And like today especially, and we've talked about this, I feel like I have this like thesis that I've been playing with, that the decline of truth always coincides with the growth of anti-Semitism, right? Because if I think the Jewish people are meant to represent this search for truth that we discovered in The Catcher in the Rye, let's say, and what's missing is, and alongside that, when we enter a post-truth era, which I feel like we're in a little bit right now in America and beyond, there's an element of, okay, fine, we don't care about truth anymore, so we can say totally absurd things about the Jewish people that are like not based in any reality. So I don't know. It seems maybe Rabbi Einhorn's right, but it feels like for me, like certainly this obsession with truth like is like everywhere in me now, and it really like came from a 6th grade encounter. It's wild.
That's beautiful, and I so admire. It's like you have your personal mission statement.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah,
and it seems like it's led to your whole career.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Holden Caulfield. Who knew? I got to thank J.D. Salinger one day. Is J.D. Salinger still alive? I don't know. No. All right. Sorry, J.D. We'll think of you.
Yeah.
But very crazy. Yeah.
And then the next category that we do on the podcast is a book that you read as an adult that impacted your Jewish identity. What book was that?
Yeah. Okay. So here's the one I'm going to mention two, but I'm going to focus on one, if that makes sense. This was so hard for me. I'm an emek. I need to do Aleph and Taf. So I think consistently, you know, my like Jewish adulthood, I kind of have two books on my shoulders at the same time that are, I think, very rarely put together. This is another example of me being someone who's in multiple worlds. One is Alei Shur by Rav Shlomo Volbe, which is a book in Hebrew. I won't recommend it. If people have access to that type of language, go find it. It's the best book out there. But it's a practical approach to Jewish character development, written by someone who was kind of, let's say, Holocaust adjacent, and really, you know, writes about Jewish character development post-Holocaust. And that's like, that book is like in my ear about like how to be in the world like on a day-to-day basis. And then alongside that is a book that I'm sure we both appreciate, which is The Jewish Way by Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, which I actually, it's wild. I found when my grandfather passed away, actually my grandmother passed away, we went through their library, and I found in their library a first edition of The Jewish Way, and it's actually inscribed to my grandfather from Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, which is really cool. To Murray Pantira, a living model of Jewish heroism in life and faith and building on the Jewish way today, Yitzhak Greenberg, from 1991, which is crazy. They were on the U.S. Holocaust Commission together. Whatever, that's a longer story for another day. But the Jewish way, I would say, is like my theology and understanding of how the whole Jewish system works. So Alei Shur is like how to be a Jew, like in terms of interacting with humans. And this is like, if I go to the balcony and I want to understand what's the Jewish calendar, what are the holidays for, that like book like opened up, you know, I'm sure, you know, we're both very fond of Rav Yitzhak, like that's like introduced me to the idea of Tselem Elokim, the idea that every human is created in God's image, the idea of that Judaism is about choosing life and a path towards, you know, every mitzvah, everything we do is about trying to increase the quality of life on the world. The idea of covenant, he actually, so beautiful, he says in the beginning, I got to read it so I don't get it wrong, but he dedicates it to Blue, his amazing wife, to Blue, who taught me the meaning of covenantal love, which is just like, Rav Yitzhak, you're the best ever. And like, you know, he means it, and you know, he lives it, which is why it's even better. And this idea of like we're in covenant with God and we're like going on a journey through history towards improving the world. And then he beautifully, like, he just lays out the calendars, the holidays. He's got like the idea of the three big, the Shalosh Regalim, Passover and Shavuot. I don't know how to say Shavuot in English.
Festival of Weeks?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, I think we'll just say Shavuot. And then Sukkot, the Festival of Booths, I guess, let's say. Yeah. How they're kind of like represent like the Jewish mission, right? Which is like we have this like intense moment of falling in love with God when God takes us out of Egypt. And then we have this moment of like covenant at Shavuot where we accept the Torah upon us. And then we have the story of Sukkot, which kind of like helps us think about the narrative, our journey, the day-to-day of it, which if you look at actually the 3 Megillas you read during those times. So Passover we read Shir HaShirim, which is like the Song of Songs, which is like a like Eros love, like first encounter, and then Shavuot is the book of Ruth, which is about like responsibility, marriage, covenant, those kinds of questions. And then we read, how do you say it in English? Ecclesiastes, I guess. How do you say Ecclesiastes on Sukkot, which is about like the power of each breath, like, you know, each day of your life, like what it's about. And so I think like he lays that up beautifully, and that could be its own book. But then he's like, okay, now I'm going to do Shabbat, Yom Kippur, and Rosh Hashanah, and those are like the ones that are about like the day to day, like how you improve as a human, how you know have your moments of rest every Shabbat. And then he says, let's look at Hanukkah and Purim and Tisha B'av, how like Jewish history continues, like how we think about Jewish history and how we make sense of it. And then he finally leads to the present, and he talks about Yom HaShoah and Yom Ha'atzmaut, how like even in modern times we need to be creating new holidays to commemorate what's going on. And so for me, like, it really just lays out, and like each of these has like hundreds of nuggets that like if you just pick that one nugget, it's enough Torah to like give a Dvar Torah and change your life. And he kind of goes to the balcony and does all that in one place. I'm talking for long again. Get in.
No, I want to ask you more about it. It strikes me, the 2 books that you mentioned, I just interviewed him for the podcast. That's definitely another huge highlight. I mean, what an honor and a privilege. But he talked about studying in the yeshiva Beis Yosef, where he was started as a teen, and that was inspired by the Musar movement, which was also about character development and, you know, ethical formation for. So I love that those were the 2 that you brought together, and that's so much of what his teachings are about, of bringing those things together. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you got to know him?
Yes, great, beautiful, thank you. And I didn't know if I should say that that's my book. That
I wasn't sure.
We should do it now, I guess, when we'll get to the other ones later. So I would say the actual way that I got to know him actually was, shout out to the Wexner Heritage Program. My father was a Wexner Heritage Fellow, and Rav Yitz was a teacher of his there. So that was like the first time that Rav Yitz kind of came into our life. Rav Yitz and Blue were the guest scholars in between rabbis at our shul, Eitz Chaim and Livingston, one year, and I went to Chovevei. And I don't remember exactly the order of those things, but those were all kind of 3 like moments where I encountered Rav Yitz around the same time when I was starting like to become a rabbi. I studied with Rav Yitz. I kind of learned his theology, and again, it was the same time, that book Alei Shor I mentioned before. And you're right, he is a Musar guy, but like Alei Shor is like popular in the more Haredi world, and Rav Yitz is popular more in the, let's call it like liberal Orthodox to liberal Judaism world. That's why they're not usually together. And I had Rav Yitz as a teacher. I got to know Rav Yitz. I became very close with Rav Yitz, and just was like, oh my God, like this is, oh my God, like just you're in his class and you're just like frantically taking notes, and you're just like, this is, oh my God, here's all the answers I needed for understanding the world and Judaism and everything. Like, this person has it, unbelievable. And then you discover later, like, he also has written on the Holocaust and then Christian-Jewish relations, and it's and you know, co-invented Birthright, and you know, like, and adult Jewish learning and all those things. And you're like, this is total, like, oh my God, it's crazy. But I had, you know, in addition to that, I had the amazing opportunity as I was graduating Chovevei, becoming a rabbi. He had been working on Or Yisrael. He had been working many years earlier, I should say, like 30 years earlier. He had written a transcript on a translation of the Or Yisrael, which Or Yisrael is the book written by the founder of the Musar movement, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and he lived in the 1800s. Rav Yitz and I had kind of reconnected over Musar, Jewish character development, and he was like, let's dust that off and, you know, give it a clean up and try to work on it and like write some essays and all those kinds of things. And he also had some nonprofit things that he was working on. He was developing what was then like a Jewish nonprofit that has now become part of Hadar. And so I spent, I think, the next 3 years in a part-time way going to Rav Yitz's house in Riverdale and sitting with him in his office, and, you know, studying the Or Yisrael so we could work on a translation and working on nonprofit stuff, and also like having lunch with him and spending time with him in Blue. And it was just like, I mean, I'm very thankful for so many things in my life, and that's like certainly up there as one of the things that I was like, this is totally crazy. How did I end up here? I'm very, very grateful. And like, you know, we talk about like learning from the human in Judaism as well, not just learning from their writings, and the opportunity to learn from both him and Blue consistently was just, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just crazy. That also, I was just like, I felt like I was like, this was like this amazing thing that like, who am I to be sitting here experiencing this? Like, I need to like capture it on film and share it with the world, because I don't know, this is like, I feel not fair that I get to do this, if that makes sense.
You can write your book about that experience.
And by the way, it's in there. I know, one of these days.
Yeah, no, that's what a beautiful, special experience both of the two of them, you just learn so much just by being in their presence.
Yes.
Truly.
It's amazing. That was when my Tali and I got engaged. One of the things that was important to us. So Rav Yitz was our Masader Kedushin. He did our wedding, but also like they invited us to have dinner with them, and that was like Tali and I came over and we sat with Yitz and Blue and like had dinner with them, and this was like very memorable experience to this day. We still discuss because it's like when you're starting a marriage, you're planting seeds of how to do things, and you can like learn from their model. Hopefully, we should be so blessed to try to pick that up, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember they gave some parenting advice when we had our first, and just talked about they talked about gentleness, and just like that's what they see as like the most important thread in being a parent, is just being gentle with your children. They didn't mean the like current trend of gentle parenting, but that's something that sticks with me 21 years later. So yeah. And
by the way, the number of people when they hear I'm associated with Rav Yitz anyway who like share stories of what they learned from him and what that thing was. I mean, my in-laws' neighbor said he's alive because of Rav Yitz, because Rav Yitz, this is not PC anymore, now that we're in a woke era, or maybe woke is finished, I'm not sure, it depends if you watch South Park, sorry, but he used to encourage people because of the Holocaust to have one more child than they were planning to have. Right. And so like multiple times people have been like, oh yeah, I'm alive because of Rav Yitz. My parents were planning to have 3, I'm number 4. My parents were planning to have 2, I'm number 3. It's like a totally wild thing. And people have memories of like, I went to Aspen with Wexner Heritage, and the one thing I remember is I was on top of a mountain with Rav Yitz and what he said to me about this. It's crazy. Yeah. To have that kind of impact.
That's a really special experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a book that changed your worldview, a book that you think everyone should read.
Yes. Okay, so this is a story, not a book, I guess, let's say, which is the story of Joseph and his brothers. It is by far my favorite book in Tanakh, and I love all books equally in Tanakh, but it starts with, I think it's Genesis 37 through the end, Parshat Vayeshev, until the end of Genesis, Bereshit. I know there's like Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat out there, which I'm so grateful is made, and people should, see that too, as if you want a way to access it. I think I'm first of all drawn to Yosef as a human. My Hebrew name is Yosef. My grandfather Murray, his brother Chaim Yosef was among his siblings who were killed. In his case, he was in Krakow and was trying to escape the Krakow ghetto, and the ghetto was liquidated, and he was shot on the spot and killed, and he was 16, and that sucks. But I carry his namesake, so I've always been drawn to Yosef in general. And for me, like this story in particular, it's just like so many core ideas that reflect my Judaism, how I think about the world, come from that story. I think the first is the idea of like, the Hebrew word is kochot, I don't know how to say that in English, like latent potential strengths and qualities, this idea that like every human is born with, let's call them gifts, maybe that's better than kochot, and that like the challenge of life is trying to find a way, like how do you actualize them in a way that's towards service. So we have this like impressive Yosef who's got these crazy dreams and is interpreting, and everyone's drawn to him, and he's handsome, and all these things are going for him, but like it's causing trouble for him as a child. And then as we get to later in life, we discover that actually like he's learned to use those things in a way that is helping society in certain ways, if that makes sense. The second is how to thrive in diaspora. I think that like there's the humility of Yosef recognizing his tools don't come from him when he finally comes out and says, it's not me interpreting your dreams, it's God. But I would say a step further is like, I would like aspirationally hope that Jews would show up like that in general in diaspora, because I think there's a lot of focus on like the success. We as humans who are Jews, we got all these Nobel Prizes, we invented toys, like things like that, instead of being like, these are gifts from God, I'm here to serve God, and I'm trying to show up in the diaspora, I'm going to improve your society, but every time you see me and are impressed by me, I'm wearing a kippah, I believe in God, those kinds of things. I think that is a model for me of like how to be a successful Jew in diaspora, like if we could copy that. The third is in my mind, like, we call the original sin, but the original sin for me is not Adam and Eve, as it is in Christianity, but is the brothers selling Yosef, right? That's like the moment of rupture that goes through history. Like our sages say, that is Tisha B'Av. The 9th of Av, that's when that happened. At that moment of Jew against Jew crime, family against family crime. It's super interesting, right? Because we have the story of Isaac and Ishmael separating, never reunited, right? I think, people ascribe that to Jews and Muslims, let's say, and then we have Jacob and Isaac separating and never properly reuniting, and people say it's kind of Jews and Christians, but like the deep, and they don't like necessarily have war with each other, but the deep, painful sin where someone hurts is the brother sending him away as a slave, and that's like, that plants the seeds for the temples being destroyed and this idea of baseless hatred and, civil war happening in Israel leading up to October 7th. Like, this has kind of been a thread through Jewish history that I think is so powerful. That is also in the Joseph story. And then kind of the dovetail of that is that the Joseph story, and Rabbi Sachs writes this beautifully, introduces us to the idea of both teshuvah and forgiveness. Right? So we have the idea of Judah, Joseph's brother, Yehuda, who makes these mistakes and then has an opportunity to act differently in the same exact situation with his brother Benjamin, and he fixes it. And then you on the flip side, you have Yosef, who, and Rabbi Sachs says, God can't forgive us until we learn to forgive each other. And we have this moment where Yosef breaks down and cries and forgives people. Those are my four. I have one more I want to say, but I've been talking too long, so I'll breathe if you want to say something.
No, just I'm appreciating that story in a whole new way with that reading of it. So thank you for sharing it. All
right, so I'll add my piece. Those four I feel like are agreed upon by most Jews. Maybe the Thrive in Diaspora part is me, I'm not sure, but I think those were like core pieces of the Joseph story. The last is like something that I'm like, I've been obsessed with for a couple of years now, which I call, it's a working thesis, maybe I'll write a book one day, called Ish Basadeh, the man in the field. And this is the idea that one of the core inflection points of the story is Jacob sends his son Yosef out to find his brothers. And this is a stage where it's clear that the brothers don't get along with him. And this is when he's going to go find them to be sold into slavery. And he looks in the fields and he can't find them. And an Ish Basadeh, a random stranger, he comes across. And that random stranger says, I think they went that way. And then he goes that way. And then history is changed forever because of that, all those moments. And I think that it's my theology these days is that every human we interact with is an Ish Basadeh in some way in our lives, and that those Ish Basadeh, I'll call them the word malachim, which is, it literally means angel when we translate to English, but it really is messengers. And I'm a big believer that, almost like in a matrix, that God sends people to say things to us in certain moments that change the direction of our lives in small and big ways. And I experience it. Sometimes I say things come out of my mouth and I'm like, why am I saying this right now? Why do I have these lines in the movie right now? They make 99 out of 100 times that would not be what I would say in that scenario, but I hear myself saying this right now. I'm like, wow, someone must have the controls for a second right now because they need me to say this thing to this person. And I see it in all different parts of my life. And I think it's shaped the whole way I interact with humans differently, and also listening to things that are said in passing from a stranger at Starbucks or whatever. And you're like, why did that just happen? And maybe I'm crazy, but I take those things very seriously and bring them in, if that makes sense. And I'll add, since my grandfather passed away, his Hebrew name was he said Mechuel, but Michael, who's the messenger of God. And his whole life he said, a messenger, an angel from God put my name on Schindler's List, and he never understood how that happened. But then I realized in his name was Mechuel, Michael, the angel of God, and in some ways he must have been touched by an angel in that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. And just that orientation of going through the world with that level of intentionality and looking at other people and listening in that way is just a powerful way to go through the world.
It's like a practice a little. I'm working on it.
Yeah. Amazing. Tell us what you're reading now.
Yes. All right. So again, I have two answers, but I'll just my whole life right now is
I have two answers.
I have two answers, but also that I'm constantly trying to read something from the self-improvement Jewish learning space in small doses, and I'm also usually preparing for my next interview as part of my job. And so by my bedside is this book called Living Emunah. I think it's David Asher. It's spelled Ashir, but I think it's David Asher. Rabbi Asher, if you're listening, I really apologize. It's just 1 to 2 page stories of moments of faith where someone they're all stories that people send to him about themselves, and they're unbelievable, and he contextualized them, but just the idea of staying in it. I think since COVID, it's been really hard to have faith in the world, have faith in myself, feel like it's going to be okay. And you add on October 7th, add on anti-Semitism, it's hard. And I think a page of this every night is centers me. And this is more playful finally, which is I'm reading right now, Playmakers, the Jewish entrepreneurs who created the toy industry in America, by Michael Kimmel. And this is just the thesis of the book is basically that, and he'll be on the show in the coming weeks, is that immigrants to America who had Jewish immigrants to America who had difficult childhoods at the beginning of the last century, developed the ideal version of childhood and created toys to help create that as a fantasy for the next generation of people, which I think is super fascinating.
I can't wait to hear and watch that episode.
Yeah.
That's great. So usually I talk to people about the book that they published as our last book.
Yeah.
So I look forward to your book on Ish Basadeh.
Yeah.
Or any of the others that you're going to write. Fantastic. Can't wait to have you on. But I know that you were very involved in Or Israel, and we talked about it a little bit. But what was the experience of writing it? I guess you talked a little bit about that, but tell us more about that book.
Yeah, great. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter is kind of not always so well known. This is Or Israel. If you've been watching JBS and my show and you don't know about it, I'm embarrassed. It's actually the backdrop of the show matches the backdrop of the book. This is a letter of Rav Salanter with Rabbi Yosef Feimer, and they had a conversation, and it represents the show, which is a conversation between people. I think there's so much here. I'm very grateful that I would not have picked this Musar book to translate if I had to pick a Musar book, and doing it with Rabbi Yitz was amazing. He was the founder of the movement. He was way ahead of his time. He was really thinking about how to prepare for modernity, and I think kind of the two big questions come for that is like, once people are no longer have to be Jewish, what's going to help them want to be Jewish? And then also, once people get stuck kind of in communities where they are still in a small group, how do you move them beyond just kind of rote behavior and actually like develop meaning in their work? And I think what he ends up combining is really psychology, Torah learning, like emotional IQ, like all those pieces, social responsibility, all kind of come together nicely in his writing. It's also interesting because it's not a book written like a sefer where he's like writing it for an audience. These are letters that he wrote to his students or journal articles he wrote in journals. And it's kind of like you go through his letters and you see how they evolved over time and how his thinking changed, if that makes sense. Go.
No, I'm just curious when he lived and when these letters were written. Yeah,
so he lived, I think, 1810 to I don't know by heart, I think 1886, 1885, but he lived in the 1800s. So the letters were written. He basically evolved over his life. He moved from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, and in Eastern Europe it was very much like, I want to do this in a respectful way. Basically, the way he describes it, the best metaphor he gives is horses running down a mountain. So he felt like in Eastern Europe, the horses were just starting to run down the mountain, and people didn't know how to respond to that yet, because like Judaism was like starting to rupture because of modernity, and people didn't realize there was a problem. So he moved to Western Europe later in his life, because there he felt like the horses were already at the bottom of the mountain. Like Jews had already experienced the Enlightenment and had left the shtetl, for lack of a better term, and now recognized that, like, okay, well, what does it look like to bring Judaism into the university? Or the flip side of that, what does it mean to make the yeshiva look more university-like? So he was like one of the proponents of like the yeshiva boys should dress well and be clean, and that like there should be a certain level of upkeep in yeshiva. Like this idea of like, okay, what is Judaism going to look like now that we're entering and going to go through the Enlightenment? That was a big piece of his revolutionary thinking. He was way ahead of his time. Some people weren't ready for his ideas. I think the other thing that was very big that he did was psychology. Like people say that he's talking about the subconscious in here before Freud, or that he introduced the idea before Freud, and he started saying, you could be the best student in yeshiva, you can convince yourself of any halacha, any Jewish law that's correct, but in reality, what's your checks and balances? How are you going to make sure that you're not deceiving yourself into thinking you're doing the right thing just because you think you're doing the right thing? And so he came up with ideas of having like what's called a vad, a group of Jews around him that could be in conversation with each other, that kind of thing. I'm sensitive to time on my own show because I have so many things to say about Or Israel, but I left it for the end.
I'm so grateful that you shared it with us, and I hope people will pick it up and read it.
Thank you. And I'll add that Rav Yitz, plug to Rav Yitz, has two beautiful essays at the beginning. One about how he encountered Musar, which you mentioned, which is amazing, and the second is just like the power of Rav Salanter and how he, who he was and what he was trying to do.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing those with us, and I hope I get to have you on my show.
Amazing. Tali, thank you so much. What a treat. And happy Jewish Book Month, everyone.
Thank you.
הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבסך